Hello, and welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about myths about death and dying. Now, I know this is a podcast about grief. Nikki, what are you doing? Well, here's the thing. I'm also an end-of-life doula, and this is what I talk about more than anything is grief and death. So it makes me real fun at parties. Anyway, but the reason why I wanted to talk about this a little bit is sometimes learning more about death and dying can help destigmatize death and dying, which is part of grief and grieving. But sometimes it feels like if you are a little more educated, it takes the sting out of your loss a little bit. Obviously, loss is loss. It's going to hurt. But sometimes just learning a little bit more about the dying process and what's going to happen, it can help ease a little bit of the pain when it comes to grief. Because part of what makes grief so hard is when you don't fully understand what's happened or what's going on. And obviously, things like this don't always help in sudden and traumatic losses, but if somebody you love is going through a terminal illness or a long, their death is imminent, we know it's coming, it's coming down the line, so to speak, understanding a little bit more helps ease that pain a little bit. And this is something as a doula I do with my clients, as I will help talk to them and their loved ones and explain things that may or may not happen in the final days, hours, minutes, whatever, just to prepare them. Because if you are a little more prepared and you understand a little more, it doesn't necessarily make it easy, but it can make it a little bit easier to witness some of these things, to know why something is happening, why it's not happening, why it's not like the movies, because death is not like the movies. Okay? So I happened upon this article online from the Today Show where they had talked to a hospice nurse, and she talked about a lot of these myths. So I'm just going to kind of use this article to go off of, and we'll go from there, okay? But first and foremost, like I say all the time, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. Death is part of life. We're all going to die one day, right? Let's all just know and accept that. Every now and then I encourage people to just say out loud, I'm going to die one day. Because the more we don't talk about it, the more we avoid it, the harder it is, right? So let's just all sit back and admit we all know we're going to die, okay? So here are a few of the myths about death and dying. First myth, death happens all at once. Okay. Now, it can, sort of. I mean, there can be a tragic accident where somebody does die very suddenly, but most people, the vast majority of people, are going to die from some type of terminal illness, even if it's just old age. But for the most part, death is not going to happen it's not going to be like snapping your fingers and you're gone. Okay, this isn't Thanos with the stones thingy. I don't watch Marvel movies. Anyway, me trying to be relatable and failing. This is like me trying to make sports references. Anyway, I love this. I'm not cutting that out either. All right. So death doesn't happen all at once. It's not like snapping your fingers and you're gone, right? Especially if it's a terminal illness or end-stage disease, things like that will eventually result in your death. And I think most people kind of understand this and know this, but I don't think they fully understand just how gradual it can be. I think what a lot of people may have in their mind is things you see in movies or TV where, yes, somebody has cancer, let's say, and they slowly decline over a period of time, and then they get to their last day and they're lying in bed and they're sighing, I love you all, I'll miss you, and then their last words, and then they just kind of sigh and stop breathing. That's typically not how it goes. Our bodies will gradually shut down, and this can take days, weeks, months even. And even to the point when somebody's not communicative anymore, it can still be days after that before they go. And you'll have moments of breathing, slowing, stopping, and starting again. So our bodies know what to do, okay? It's like childbirth. Your body knows what to do, and it starts the process whether you're ready or not. It's kind of how death happens too. Our bodies know what they're doing, and it knows how to shut down properly. It's like shutting down a computer. You don't just hit that power button and hold. Sometimes you have to. But the IT person in me, you don't just like turn it off every night. You're supposed to slowly shut things down, right? Although rebooting is better than shutting. You know what? This isn't the IT podcast. Okay. So yes, death doesn't happen in the blink of an eye. It can, again, there are accidents, things like that. But for the most part, it's a long process, and it can be, a few days to a few months. Okay. Next myth, dying is painful. Yes, it can be. Okay. But it's not always painful. For the most part, again, like I said before, our bodies know what they're doing. Our bodies work without our brains. Well, they don't work without our brain, but without us controlling it. Like, you don't think to digest, right? You don't think to breathe. You don't think to make your heart beat. Our bodies know what they're doing. And our bodies our bodies protect us. I talk all the time about grief and depression being a coping mechanism and a way to protect us. The delayed reaction to trauma a lot of times is our body protecting us. It's our brain protecting us. And our body knows we don't want to feel pain. It recognizes that pain is awful, right? So our body knows how to protect us from that. That's why a lot of times if somebody's in a terrible accident, they will go into a coma and they won't remember any of it because their body turned that off. So you don't have to remember the physical pain. So, trust. Get a little bit of trust. But no, dying is not always painful. And I could do a whole episode on hospice. I may. But if hospice is involved, they'll make sure you're not in pain. That's what they do. They're comfort care. Hospice is comfort care, and they will keep you as comfortable as humanly possible. All right, next myth. Death is a medical event and or a failure. So the bottom of, if you go to my website, nikkithedeathdoula.com, the very bottom of every single page is a quote. Death is not a medical experience, it's a human experience. And that is true. Death is not a medical experience, and it is not a failure. And this is a bit of a disconnect with the medical community and dying, because you may hear stories of doctors wanting to just try one more thing or keep pushing or do more treatment when somebody is ready to say, I'm done, just let me die. Because, there's no fault to the doctor. They're not doing anything evil by insisting on more treatment. That's what they're trained to do. They're trained to save lives. And they view death as a failure. Not always, not all doctors, obviously. But death is sometimes viewed as they screwed up. This person died. I could have done better. But that's not the case. Death is when it happens. It's inevitable. We're all going to be there. And to try to avoid it is just an exercise in futility. So certain things, and this is specified in the article, where with somebody who has a terminal illness or a loved one with somebody with a terminal illness, saying things like, I'm just going to pray for a miracle, never stop fighting. That might not be helpful for somebody who is dying. Let them decide. Let them... And those phrases can be, it says in here, is very demotivating because it feels like they're giving up or they're doing something wrong by accepting death and by not, fighting more. So that's one of those things, I had a whole episode on what to say and what not to say to grieving, but things you don't say to people who are dying. Don't tell them, just keep fighting. Just keep fighting. Because what if they can't? What if they're done? You're going to make them feel like a failure because they didn't keep fighting. So let the patient die on their own terms. That's how it should always be. We should have complete authority and autonomy of our own death. Okay? Whenever possible. Okay. Next myth, again, I feel like I should do a whole episode on hospice. Hospice is for people who are right about to die. That is not true. And this is something me and my other doula friend here in Columbus, Jill, she's a hospice nurse by trade. And we cannot emphasize enough to start hospice early. Hospice is not for the final days. Hospice is for your final months. And the qualification to get, hospice treatment is to have a prognosis of 6 months or fewer, right? But that's not always exact. And this is determined by your doctor or by a hospice doctor, okay? And even if they say, okay, the end is near, it's inevitable, they may have 6 months, they may have 10, they will at least start hospice. And people come in and out of hospice. It's happened, and it can happen, and that's okay. Hospice isn't like a hard and fast, and also hospice is not a place. It's not a place you go to. There are respite care centers, but hospice is just a program. It's not jail either, okay? You don't go into hospice and you're just stuck there until you die. No. If you go on hospice and you're like, you know what? I don't need or want this. Then guess what? You can quit hospice. And I guarantee you they're not going to be mad. They're not going to care. They'll say, wonderful. Call us if you need us again. Okay? Hospice is not for the final days. It's for the final months. Because if you wait that long, you might have really done a disservice to yourself or to your loved one by waiting so long. If you start hospice early, you give them a chance to have a better quality of their last few months. They're still going to die in those, within a certain period of time, but the hospice can make a difference of whether or not their last few months are just excruciatingly awful or peaceful and comfortable. They might be able to get you to a point where you can relax and communicate with your family and talk and do what you need to do before you go. So don't wait. Hospice is not for the last couple days. Another myth that drives me crazy. Hospice speeds up the dying process. There are so many awful myths out there about hospice, and it drives me insane. They think that hospice comes in to kill you, or that hospice comes in to speed up your dying, to make you die quicker. They're like, come on, got to get you out of here. No, that is so not true. It's such a misconception. Hospice is not there to hasten your dying process. And there's no evidence anywhere that hospice care does speed up death. I'm reading that directly from this article. Studies have even shown, and this is from the article, quote, studies have shown that people can live up to 20 days longer on hospice when you look at the difference between patients with the same diseases. What? Exactly. Hospice is not they can actually extend your life. Maybe not by years, maybe not by months, but by weeks or days. And sometimes those extra few days are so precious. Hospice isn't there because you're giving up. Hospice is there to help you be comfortable. Okay? And they're there really just to help with a lot of the medical necessities. You might get to a point where you're incontinent and maybe catheterization is needed, things like that, wound care. A lot of times if you're bedbound, you might get bed sores. And to just kind of help keep those things at bay, right? They're not there to make you die. Again, maybe I should just do a whole episode on that. All right, next myth. Dying people see a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, this one might get me some crap. And I'm not crapping on anybody's religious beliefs or thoughts, anything or opinions regarding what you see in this light at the end of the tunnel. Okay? And it's just fact that the most common vision before death is not a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just become one of those things that's romanticized in media. Okay. And again, quoting directly, what a person sees, hears, and feels in the moments before death can vary widely. And sometimes you might see some type of a light. There might be a bright light. And I've read some very interesting articles on brain function, which we still don't know much about brain function in the final moments of our life. But certain synapses will start firing real fast, and that might cause flashes. And again, I'm not poo-pooing anybody's religious beliefs. I promise, you know, that's not who I am. But there can be a medical reason for things like that to happen. But there's also all sorts of unexplainable phenomenon that can happen. Seeing loved ones, that's very common. Most people will see that. But interestingly enough, since I mentioned I'm not, poo-pooing religion, the light flashes, that happens to people of all religious backgrounds or spiritual backgrounds. So that happens to a lot of people. Some people just fade. Their vision just fades. They might not see anything. There's not that light at the end of the tunnel. It's a beautiful thing, and that can be a lovely metaphor you can use, and that is something some people might see, and that's wonderful. But that's not like a medical fact of something that's going to happen. Okay? So that was all that was in the article, but I'm going to go off script here and just share a couple other little factoids, not necessarily myths, but just little things you can know. I don't remember if I've ever mentioned it on this podcast, but I know I've done some Instagram stuff about this, about terminal lucidity or rallying. And that's one of the things I talked about with, they've done some, I actually read another article the other day on terminal lucidity and what it is. And spoiler, we still don't totally understand what's going on in the brain, but there are, again, random firings in the brain that can happen. But at the last final days of somebody's life, typically within 72 hour window, somebody might experience, they might be completely comatose, unresponsive, non-communicative, and they will, quote unquote, wake up and be like totally normal again. And this happens a lot with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, which can be very jarring for the loved ones. And a lot of times people can have that feeling of, oh my God, it's a miracle, they're okay. And that's not necessarily the case, but they'll have a moment where they just kind of like snap out of it, so to speak, and talk to you like nothing has happened. And they're totally lucid, normal, all their thoughts are there, all their memories are there. And then, they'll kind of go back, and that could last minutes, hours even, and then they'll go back to, I'm sure I have mentioned this on this episode, but either way, that's one of those things I try to warn, my clients about, so they don't get too excited and think, oh my God, it's a miracle, they're cured. That's not really what happens, but it's just one of those fascinating little things that can happen, and I don't want anybody to be put off by that. So yeah, that's about it. Again, I feel like just having more knowledge and having a little bit more education on end of life things can help kind of take that sting and fear out of end of life. I talk with a lot of people at my death cafes, and a lot of people that just, in interviews I've done with other podcasts, things like that, people have asked me if I'm scared of dying or have mentioned their own fears of death and dying. And of course, we're all scared of it, whether we want to admit it or not. And maybe we're prepared, but we can still be scared of it because, that's kind of it, So it's totally normal for people to be scared. But like anything, the more you educate yourself, it eases that fear. I have terrible flight anxiety, and I still do, but it's not to the level it was. I was able to take a seminar one day. It was like an all-day class, course, seminar, whatever you want to call it, specifically for flight anxiety. And it was life-changing for me because I was to the point where I couldn't even pick somebody up at the airport without having a panic attack, like shaking, sweating, tightness in the chest, like just picking somebody up, just seeing an airplane take off would send me into a complete spiral. And I still, when I fly, am absolutely scared, but it's taken the edge off because I took this whole day seminar and I learned so much about flight and aviation and airplane mechanics. Like, obviously I'm not a mechanic, but they went through so much of this and explained so much I just didn't know. And having that education and that knowledge now has taken a little bit of the sting out. Sure, I'm still scared of flying, but I can do it, So having that education can help take the sting out of these things. And if you've lost a loved one, knowing a little bit more about what they may have gone through can help ease your grief a little bit. Okay? That was my whole point for this. Speaking of things that can help you, I'd like to say a big thank you and shout out to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. If you've been listening to my podcast now, I'm always reminding you that professional help is a great way to work with your grief. And the folks at BetterHelp are there for you. They can help with that. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, 100% online. So, as I always say, if you don't want to put on pants for therapy, you don't have to anymore. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with any of your issues, like grief. To get started, you just go to their website, answer a couple questions about your needs and your preferences, and then BetterHelp will match you with a therapist that is just right for you from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however is good for you, whether it's text, chat, phone call, video call. If it's a video call, maybe wear pants, unless it's from the waist up. I don't know. I won't tell you how to live your life. You can also message your therapist at any time, schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you, so you don't have to miss work or your child's soccer game. And if for some reason your therapist isn't the right fit, you can always switch, no charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. More scheduling flexibility and a more affordable price. And you can get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula. So that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula. You'd be doing me a solid too, so, maybe do that. All right. All right, guys. Well, now that we're at the end of the episode, it's time for the Death Deck. Woo. All right. Shuffle this up. Doop, doop. Okay. Well, this is pretty apropos. Terminal illness. Which fate do you fear the most? A, something unpredictable like cancer. B, something instant like a heart attack or stroke. Or C, something mentally debilitating like Alzheimer's. Oh, honestly, for me, I would have to say probably C. And I feel like a lot of people would agree on this. I hear a lot of people say that they would hate to go that way. But I feel like with something, unpredictable like cancer, you at least have a little bit of time. It might only be a few weeks, but you've got some time to tie up your affairs, whatnot. I definitely do fear things like heart attack and stroke. Heart attacks run in my family. So let's just say heart disease is an issue. And I take very good care of myself, but that can still happen. Some of the healthiest people in the world have had massive heart attacks. That does scare me for sure. But honestly, I feel like losing my consciousness, my mentality, my me, I think that scares me more than anything. That was a bit of a downer. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you are well. I hope you have a lovely week coming up. And remember, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening today. It really helps the algorithm so more people can find me. But if you'd like to find me elsewhere, I'm at NikkiTheDeathDoula.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at NikkiTheDeathDoula. Please feel free to reach out to me there. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon, you can find me at patreon.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula. As always, all the money I receive through my Patreon goes into a fund so that I can provide pro bono work to those who cannot afford my services. And you'll also get access to bonus content and maybe even a shout out here on the podcast. Scripts, editing, sound design, production, literally everything is done by me, myself, just me. Except for the music. The music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find license information at filmmusic.io/standard-license. And as always, a special shout out to my best friend and husband for continuing to support me along the way.